What does it mean to be truly free in a world that was never built for your kind of wildness? From the ancient myths of Greece, carried down through centuries on the lips of storytellers and the breath of mountain winds, there comes a tale of a woman who refused every cage they tried to build around her. She was left on a hillside as an infant, abandoned to the cold and the silence, and yet somehow the wilderness claimed her as its own. She was raised not in marble halls, but beneath open sky, with the huntress goddess Artemis watching over her like moonlight over a running stream. They say she could outrun any man alive. They say her arrow never missed. And they say that when suitors came seeking her hand, she gave them only one chance and a head start. But no race runs in only one direction, and not all golden prizes are what they seem. Welcome to the story of Atalanta. Now lie back, breathe slowly, and let the ancient world take over. There is a mountain in the old country where the wind never quite settles. It moves through the pines in long, slow sighs, as though the mountain itself is breathing, as though it has lungs made of stone and a heart that has been beating since before any name was given to the land. The ancient Greeks called this place Arcadia. They spoke of it softly, with a particular reverence, a wildness held sacred, a place where the gods still walked openly among the trees, and the rivers ran cold and clear as memory. It was here, on a night when the stars were sharp and the air smelled of pine resin and coming frost, that a king made a decision he could never unmake. His name was Iasus, and he was a man who measured the world in straight lines. Power passed through sons. Legacy lived in sons. A daughter, however bright her eyes, however strong the small fists she curled against her chest in the first moments of her life, a daughter was, to a man like Iasus, a detour, a delay, something the world had handed him when it owed him something else entirely. So he gave the order, as kings sometimes do when they mistake authority for wisdom. The infant was to be taken to the slopes of the mountain and left there. No ceremony, no softness, only the cold and the dark and whatever mercy the wilderness might choose to offer. A servant carried her. We do not know his name. History has not kept it, and perhaps that is fitting. Perhaps some acts are better performed in silence and forgotten just as silently. He climbed the mountain path in the last hour before dawn, the tiny girl wrapped in a single cloth against his chest, still warm from her mother's body, still carrying the smell of the world she had only just entered. He walked until the path disappeared into rough ground and bracken. Then he set her down among the roots of an old pine, arranged the cloth as gently as he could, and turned away. She did not cry for long. Not because the cold took her, though the cold was real, settling over the mountain like a held breath, but because something else came first. She came out of the shadows between the trees, massive and slow, and ancient-looking in the way that wild things sometimes are, as though she had been there long before the mountain had its name. A she-bear, her fur the color of dark honey, her small eyes catching what little starlight filtered through the canopy. She moved without hurry. She lowered her great head and breathed in the scent of the child. That particular human warmth, that milk and skin smell, and something shifted in her. Some deep, wordless knowing that lives in creatures the way instinct lives, below thought, below choice. She lay down beside the infant. She curved her body like a wall against the wind. Whether it was fate that drew her there, or the quiet hand of a goddess who watched the wild places of the world with particular care, the old stories do not say with certainty. But those who told this tale later, sitting close around low fires, voices dropping to the register that stories earn when they matter, those tellers believed that Artemis herself had guided that heavy, gentle step through the dark. Artemis, who loved the untamed places, who loved those who needed no walls to feel held. The infant slept. Morning came slowly the way mountain mornings do, light seeping rather than arriving, softening the frost on the pine needles, warming the stone. The she-bear was still there. She would be there the next night, and the one after that, returning each dawn from wherever the wild drew her, returning each dusk to the root-hollowed place where the child waited. The girl drank bear's milk and grew strong on it. She slept in warmth borrowed from an enormous, unhurried body. She heard in her earliest weeks not the sounds of a palace, not stone floors and distant voices and the smell of oil lamps and ambition, but the sound of wind moving through high pines, the percussion of rain on bark, the low, rumbling breath of her guardian. These were her first lullabies. The mountain was her first home. In time, hunters found her. Men who moved through Arcadia's forests and knew its moods the way others knew city streets. They found a child sitting calmly in the dirt, apparently unafraid, watching the trees. They looked at one another over her head with a particular expression of people who have encountered something they will be telling their grandchildren about. They took her in. They raised her as best they could, which is to say, they raised her as the mountain had already begun to raise her, with open sky above and hard ground below, and the understanding that the world was wide and largely indifferent and beautiful because of it, not in spite of it. They named her Atalanta, and even as a small child, moving through the forest with bare feet and a straight spine, she moved as though she already knew, in some wordless, bone-deep way, that she had not been abandoned on this mountain. She had been given to it, and the mountain had kept her. She grew the way wild things grow, not in straight lines, not by careful measure, but in sudden surges and quiet deepenings, shaped by season and storm and the slow patience of old trees. By the time she was old enough to string a bow, the forest was already more familiar to her than any city wall, any hearthside, any face carved in marble, and called a god. She knew the forest the way she knew her own breathing. She moved through it like weather. Artemis found her, as Artemis tends to find those who belong to her, not with thunder or proclamation, but in a still moment at the edge of a mountain pool, where a young girl stood barefoot in the shallows and watched a deer drink without reaching for her bow. There was something in that stillness, something that understood restraint not as weakness, but as its own kind of power. The goddess, if it was the goddess, and perhaps it was only the feeling of her, seemed to settle over the clearing like light through leaves. Atalanta did not speak. She only stood. And when she left the pool, her aim was truer than it had been before, and some quiet part of her was no longer only a child. She did not hunt for glory. She hunted because she was hungry. And because the hunt was honest, and because there was no sound in the world quite like the hush before an arrow leaves the string, that held breath, that single suspended moment when the whole forest seems to listen. She loved that moment more than the kill. She loved the running most of all. She could run the way rivers run, effortlessly, inevitably. Her feet seemed to skim the earth rather than press it, and those who glimpsed her moving through the trees sometimes stopped and stared, unsure whether they had seen a woman or something older. A spirit of the hill, a shadow of the goddess herself. She was neither. She was simply Atalanta, which was perhaps more extraordinary than either. The years shaped her shoulders and her silence in equal measure. She learned to read the sky for weather, and the soil for footprints, and the wind for the scent of something near. She learned to sleep lightly and wake completely. She learned that solitude was not the same as loneliness, that one was a hollow ache and the other was a kind of freedom so full it almost hurt to breathe inside it. She chose the second every time without regret. Men came sometimes, drawn by rumor. Word had a way of traveling out of forests, even forests that kept their own counsel, and stories grew around her name the way moss grows around stone, slowly, stubbornly, transforming the shape of the thing beneath. They said she had wrestled a centaur. They said she had run down a stag on open ground without an arrow. They said she had refused a dozen suitors and sent them all away with bruised pride and nothing worse, which was generous of her, people agreed, given what she could have done. She neither confirmed nor denied any of it. She simply continued to exist at the edges of the world that men built, moving through their stories the way she moved through the forest, without apology, without particular awareness of being watched. And so it was that when the summons came for the Caledonian boar hunt, it arrived not as a summons to her directly, but as a name spoken aloud in the halls of heroes, mentioned alongside names like Meleager and Theseus and Jason, men whose legends already filled rooms when they entered them. Someone, and no one remembers now who first said it, spoke her name in that company, and no one laughed. That silence was its own kind of honor. The story of the boar was this. The king of Caledon, Onius, had forgotten to offer sacrifice to Artemis at the harvest, and the goddess, patient in many things, patient in most things, was not patient in this. She sent a boar, not the ordinary kind, bristled and ill-tempered and dangerous in the usual way, but something immense and ancient feeling, with tusks like yellow ivory and eyes that held no animal fear whatsoever. It tore through the countryside of Caledon like a wound that would not close. Orchards splintered, flocks scattered, the land itself seemed to flinch from it. Aeneas sent word to every corner of Greece, calling the great heroes together for a single hunt, and they came, as heroes do, drawn by the promise of glory and the rare and irresistible pleasure of a worthy enemy. Atalanta came because the forest called her, and because Artemis had a hand in making the creature, which meant Artemis perhaps also had a hand in gathering those who would face it. She arrived at Caledon without ceremony, with her bow and her steady gaze, and the kind of quiet that made noise feel unnecessary. Some of the men objected to her presence. Several of them said so, quite loudly, in the way that men sometimes perform their objections for an audience they imagine is sympathetic. Meleager, son of Oeneus, looked at her once and told them to be still. She did not thank him for that. She simply readied her bow. The hunt moved through the hills like a slow tide, spreading and gathering, loud with hounds and the clash of spears, and the particular slightly desperate bravado that settles over men before something genuinely dangerous. The boar was found in a marshy hollow where the reeds grew tall and the ground pulled at the foot with every step. It emerged from the reeds the way storms emerge, suddenly and with a sense that it had been waiting. Several of the heroes struck at it and were thrown back. One did not rise again. Atalanta loosed her arrow from the high ground above the hollow, and the shaft found the soft space behind the boar's ear with a sound like a sigh. It was not a killing blow, nothing so clean as that, not with a creature made from divine fury, but it was first blood, and among those who stood witness, no one pretended otherwise. The boar staggered. Meleager drove his spear home in the confusion that followed, and the beast went down slow and heavy into the mud. And the hollow was quiet again, save for the sound of breathing and the distant, unbothered call of a bird in a high tree. Meleager awarded Atalanta the hide and the tusks. There was uproar. There was the particular kind of masculine outrage that mistakes recognition for theft. She accepted the prizes without expression, rolled the hide, and bounded across her shoulders, and if she heard the complaints, she gave no sign. She walked back through the hills as the sun began to lower itself behind the western ridges, painting the sky in shades of copper and rust, and the forest that rose ahead of her was dark and familiar, and hers. Her name was already moving ahead of her, she knew, spreading outward like ripples from a stone dropped in still water, reaching places she had never been and would never go, turning her into something larger than herself and slightly less accurate. she let it go. Names were what other people made of you. The forest knew who she was, and the bow knew, and the long open ground beneath her feet knew, the ground that seemed always to say, when she was running, run. And then her father found her. It was not a violent finding, not a chase or a capture. It was quieter and in some ways stranger than that. A messenger came to the edge of the forest with a sealed letter and the kind of careful posture that suggested he had been warned about the woman he was delivering it to. He left the letter tied to a branch and retreated without looking back. She read it standing in the shade of a pine, the resin-scented air moving softly around her. The words were formal, as words from fathers to daughters, so long abandoned, tend to be, stiff with the effort of pretending distance had not occurred. But the meaning beneath the formality was plain enough. King Iasus of Arcadia had reconsidered his position. He had a daughter, after all, alive and famous, spoken of in courts and harbors from one edge of the Greek world to the other. A daughter like that was a resource. She could be married well. The right marriage could secure the right alliance, and the right alliance was worth more than most things a king could name. He wanted her home. He wanted her wed. Atalanta folded the letter slowly and stood for a long while listening to the forest settle around her. The creak of wood, the low sigh of wind through needles, the distant call of something unseen moving through the undergrowth. The forest asked nothing of her. It never had. She thought of her mother the bear, who had held her through cold nights without condition or expectation, and she felt the old familiar pull of wilderness against whatever claim blood was supposed to make. Still, she went, perhaps out of curiosity, perhaps because something in her recognized that a life spent only running away from things was its own kind of cage. Perhaps simply because the letter had reached her, and she had read it, and now a door stood open that she had not known existed. Whatever drew her, she walked out of the trees and back into the world of stone walls and crowded rooms and men who watched her with their measuring eyes. Her father's court received her with a mixture of relief and wariness. Iasus himself was older than she had imagined, a man worn smooth by years of compromise, and there was something in the way he greeted her, formal, tentative, not quite meeting her gaze, that told her he understood, at least partially, the scale of what he had done when he left her on that mountain. He did not apologize. Men like him rarely did. But he was careful with her, and that carefulness was its own kind of acknowledgment. The subject of marriage came quickly. She had expected as much. She had spent the long walk south, turning the problem over in her mind the way she might study unfamiliar terrain before a hunt, looking for the shape of it, the places where it gave way, and the places where it held firm. By the time she stood before her father in his torch-lit hall, she had her answer ready. She would race them. Any man who wished to marry her must first outrun her. If he succeeded, she would honor the match. If she outran him, and she always would, her feet were made for this, then he would pay for the wager with his life. These were the terms she offered. She did not soften them. She did not apologize for them. She stood in the warm amber light of the hall and stated them the way one states a fact about the weather or the depth of a river. Iasus agreed. She suspected he had not fully believed she meant the second part, or perhaps he told himself the suitors would be sensible and simply stay away. He was wrong on both counts. They came. Word spread the way word of Atalanta always spread, quickly, eagerly, with a kind of collective disbelief that made men want to prove something. She was fast, yes, men said to one another, but surely not that fast. She was a woman after all. Surely the right man, strong enough, trained enough, hungry enough, could close the distance. One by one they came to Arcadia, with their fine sandals and their proud lineages and their absolute certainty that this time would be different. One by one she left them behind. She ran the way the wind moves across open water, without effort, without drama, with a kind of serene indifference to the ground beneath her. She did not taunt the men she outpaced. She did not look back. She simply ran, and they fell away, and the terms of her challenge were fulfilled with a terrible consistency. The track where they raced became a solemn place. Word of the deaths did not stop the suitors from coming. If anything, it sharpened the hunger of those who believed themselves different. There is something in certain men that shines brighter the more clearly it is told it cannot have a thing. It was among the watching crowd that Hippomenes first saw her. He had come, as many young men came, in the spirit of the spectator rather than the participant. Curious about the legend, certain he himself would never be fool enough to run. He stood at the edge of the track on a warm afternoon and watched a hopeful suitor begin the race with bright eyes and finish it breathing hard and bewildered. Atalanta already still at the far end, her chest barely rising. Hippomenes watched her, and something shifted in him like a stone turning over in shallow water. He was not a foolish young man. He knew what he was looking at. He knew the difference between beauty and danger, and he understood perfectly well that in this particular case, the two were the same thing. He told himself, walking home that evening with the dust of the track still on his sandals, that he would not be returning. He returned the next morning. For several days he watched. He watched the way she moved, the way she held herself between races, still and self-contained, as if the noise of the crowd existed in a different world entirely. He watched her eyes, which were calm and dark, and gave nothing away. He told himself many things during those days. None of them helped. In the end, he did what the desperate and the lovesick have always done. He prayed. He went to a quiet shrine at the edge of the city, where Aphrodite's name was carved into old stone worn soft by years of offerings, and he knelt in the late afternoon light, and he asked, plainly and without pretense for help. He did not pretend to be worthy of it. He said only that he had seen someone extraordinary, and that he could not outrun her, and that without some form of divine assistance, he was either going to die trying or spend the rest of his life standing at the edge of a racetrack, which seemed to him nearly as bad. Aphrodite heard him. She had been watching this particular situation with considerable interest. The goddess of love did not enjoy being circumvented, and Atalanta's challenge was, at its heart, a very elaborate way of circumventing love. Besides, Aphrodite understood something that Atalanta had not yet fully allowed herself to consider: that the young woman's heart was not as closed as her challenge suggested. It was simply waiting for something that moved at the right speed. The goddess appeared to Hippomenes in the golden haze of the afternoon, warm and luminous, and smelling of something like summer orchards, and she placed in his hands 3 apples. They were small and heavy, and so deeply, impossibly golden that they seemed to hold light inside them rather than merely reflect it. She told him what to do. Her voice was honey-warm and entirely serious. "Scatter them in her path," she said, "one at a time. Do not use them all at once. Let the gap between them do its work." And then she was gone, and Hippomenes stood alone in the long afternoon shadow of the shrine, with 3 golden apples resting in his palms, and the weight of a race he had not yet entered already pressing against his chest. He entered his name the following morning. The crowd gathered as it always did, the air thick with the smell of dust and anticipation, and the particular kind of silence that falls over people who are watching something they cannot look away from. Atalanta took her place at the starting line with the same composed stillness she always carried. She looked once at Hippomenes, and something in her expression shifted, very slightly, very briefly, the way a flame bends when a door opens somewhere in the house. Then the race began, and the world narrowed to the length of a track, and the soft, relentless sound of 2 people running. She ran the way she always ran, not with effort, but with something closer to remembering. Her feet knew the ground the way a river knows its bed. Her breathing came easy and low, her arms loose at her sides, and within the first dozen strides she had already begun to open the distance between herself and Hippomenes. He had known she would. The crowd lining the track was quiet at first, the way crowds go quiet when they sense they are watching something rare. There were no cheers yet, only the soft percussion of feet on packed earth and the sound of the morning air moving through the pines at the field's edge. Atalanta felt the familiar settling that came whenever she ran, the world growing simpler, cleaner, reduced to breath and motion, and the long ribbon of ground unrolling before her. She did not look back. She never looked back. There was no need. She could hear him behind her, steady and determined, closer than most had ever managed to stay in those first moments, but still behind. She was perhaps 20 strides ahead when she heard it. Not a sound, exactly, more a quality of light, a warm golden gleam at the edge of her vision, low to the ground and rolling with an easy, unhurried grace. She turned her head without meaning to, and there it was, a small sphere of hammered gold, catching the morning sun as it curved across the track and came to rest in a shallow depression in the dust just to her left. She had heard of such things. She had told herself she would not slow. For 3 full strides she did not. Her legs carried her forward with the same unwavering rhythm. But the apple lay there in the light, luminous and still, and something older than reason moved through her. Not greed, not vanity, but a pull she had no name for, as though the object were not gold at all, but a question she had been refusing to answer for years. She veered, just slightly, 2 steps sideways, 1 step back, her fingers closing around the smooth, warm weight of it. Then she was running again, the apple held in her fist, and Hippomenes had gained perhaps 8 strides. She caught him before the next bend. Of course she did. As the night deepens without fanfare, so the race deepened into something neither of them had quite anticipated. He was running well, better than well, better than anyone she had faced. There was no desperation in his stride, no wild reaching. He ran with a kind of quiet intention, as though he were not trying to beat her, but simply trying to remain near her, and that, strangely, was harder to dismiss than any speed. The second apple came at the halfway mark. Hippomenes released it from his hand as he ran, and it rolled not straight across her path, but at an angle, lazy and glinting, drifting toward the far edge of the track, where the grass grew long and pale at the field's border. She had to leave the line entirely to reach it. She had to slow and turn and crouch low to scoop it from where it had nestled against the earth. When she straightened, he was ahead of her, ahead of her. The word rearranged itself in her chest. Not fear. She did not know fear, not truly, but something adjacent to it. Something that felt like waking suddenly in a room you thought you knew. She ran hard then, harder than she had run since the mountains of her childhood, and she reeled in the distance between them with the focused ease of a hawk closing on a thermal. Still, she had slowed, and they both knew it. And so it was that she pulled alongside him with less than a third of the track remaining, and for a moment, one strange, suspended moment, they ran together, side by side, his breathing rough and warm, hers steady. She could see the line of his jaw, the set of his shoulders, the way he stared ahead with an expression that was not arrogance, but something quieter, resolve perhaps, or faith. She could have gone. She felt the speed coiled inside her, ready. All she had to do was let it loose. She did not let it loose. She did not know, even then, why she did not. She told herself she was simply watching him, reading his stride, preparing. She told herself she had time. The end of the track was still ahead, and she was Atalanta, and no one had ever outrun Atalanta. The third apple left his hand like a sigh. It did not roll far. It dropped close, almost directly in front of her, and it bounced once on the packed earth before coming to a slow, wobbling rest just to the side of her path. She could have leapt over it. She almost did. Her body was already adjusting, her weight shifting forward to carry her clean past it and into the final stretch. But she stopped, not stumbled, not faltered, stopped, the way you stop when something catches you from the inside rather than the outside. She bent and she lifted the apple from the dust, and she held all three of them now in her hands, cool and gold and heavier than they should have been, and Hippomenes ran past her. She watched him go. For a moment that seemed to hold its breath, she simply watched. The crowd had found its voice by then, a low wave of sound rolling across the field, but it came to her as though from a great distance, muffled by something she could not quite identify. She looked down at the apples in her hands. She looked up at the figure of Hippomenes, still running, his form growing smaller as he neared the end. She could still catch him. She knew this. There were seconds yet, and her legs were not tired, and the space between them was not so great that her speed could not have swallowed it whole. She did not run. She stood at the center of the track in the morning light, with the golden apples cradled in her arms, and something moved through her that she had never felt before on any mountain or in any forest. Not the fierce, clean joy of a kill, not the solitary peace of a night beneath open stars, but something warmer and more bewildering than either. Something that did not diminish her, but that she had no previous shape for. Hippomenes crossed the end of the track and turned, his chest heaving, his face open with an astonishment that was very close to wonder. He had not quite believed, even as he did it, that it would work. He looked at her across the length of the field, and he did not smile with triumph. He simply looked as though he understood that what had just happened was not a victory over her, but something far more delicate than that. Not far from there, at the edge of the tree line where the pines grew dark and close, a deer stood without moving and watched the stillness at the center of the field. Then it stepped back into the green shadow of the forest, and the morning continued around Atalanta, unhurried as it always had, only now it carried with it the faint, unfamiliar warmth of a door left open. Time moves differently in old stories. It slows at the edges, like water pooling where a river meets still ground, and what seems like an ending opens into something wider, a sky you did not know was there until you looked up. So it was with Atalanta. The seasons turned as they always do in Arcadia, unhurried and indifferent to the small dramas of mortal hearts. The oaks shed their leaves and grew them back. The rivers ran low in summer and full in the rains. The mountain slopes that had once cradled a cold and motherless infant continued their ancient breathing, unmoved by the legends gathering around a name. And yet the name gathered nonetheless. She did not vanish into softness. Those who expected love to smooth her edges found instead that she remained exactly herself, fleet and fierce and luminous in her own particular way. She still rose before the light touched the hills. She still moved through the forest as though the forest had grown around her, rather than she having entered it. The bow did not leave her hand for long. The wilderness she had been given as a cradle remained the truest home she had ever known, and no warmth of hearth or harvest could replace the smell of pine resin and morning mist on stone. What changed was smaller and more honest than the old songs sometimes claim. She had chosen something, not because she was bested, not because a god had forced her hand, but because in that last shining moment on the racetrack, with a golden apple lying still in the dust before her, she had looked inward and found, without warning, that she wanted to. There is a kind of freedom in that too, the freedom not only to refuse the world, but to meet it when the meeting is your own. Hippomenes, for his part, understood this. He had won a race by cunning and grace and the borrowed mercy of a goddess, but he was wise enough to know that what stood beside him afterward was not a prize. She had let him catch her. That was the whole of it, and the whole of it was everything. As the night deepened over Arcadia, as it deepened over all the wild and storied places of old Greece, the stars emerged one by one, like memories surfacing in the mind before sleep. Artemis, they say, still moves among them, silver and sovereign, bow raised, forever hunting across the dark. And somewhere in that wide and quiet field of light, the older Greeks would look up and remember a girl who had been left on a mountain and survived. Not because she was rescued, because she was already whole. She had run beside the greatest heroes of her age and drawn first blood from the Caledonian boar when stronger arms had missed their mark. She had stood at the edge of her own life and set the terms of it with her own voice, in an era when women were rarely given voice at all. She had been fleet where others were slow, clear-eyed where others were clouded, and sure-footed on paths no one had thought to walk before her. The wilderness had shaped her, yes, but she had also shaped it in return, leaving her name like a scent in the air long after she had passed. The she-bear who nursed her on those first cold nights is gone now into myth, as all tender things eventually go. But something of her lingers in the low sound the mountains make before a storm, a deep, slow breathing, like a creature at rest, like a mother keeping watch. And on certain mornings in Arcadia, when the mist sits low among the silver-limbed trees, and the world is quiet enough to hear itself, you might feel it. The particular stillness of a forest that remembers. Let the old stories carry you now. Let them settle like warm ash around the edges of the mind. Atalanta ran and ran and ran, and in the end she chose her own stillness. Not the stillness of defeat, the stillness of a life fully inhabited, a spirit that had burned its own true color from the very first breath on a cold Arcadian slope, all those long years ago. The stars hold her name tonight, as they have always held it. The forest is breathing, and somewhere, soft and far away, an arrow finds the dark, and the dark opens willingly to receive it. Rest now. The story is complete.